Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Would you please take your seats? We're about to start. If you could find a seat somewhere and get comfortable. I think we will start. Time is a bit important in an evening meeting, so it's after 6:30 and I'll declare the meeting open. A couple of housekeeping announcements. This event will be video recorded. If anyone feels uncomfortable about that, then you're certainly entitled to leave. Otherwise, stick around and see what happens. But there'll be a video operating, and the whole idea of that is to just be absolutely positively certain that what somebody might think was said, or what somebody thought was said wasn't. So we'll keep a record of what happens. Could you turn off your mobile phones, please? The toilets are through a door down there, or the front door here on this side, and through the middle door on that side. And that's about all for housekeeping. Now, the order of speakers will be Kevin Chambers, surgeon, Dr. Vasa Skoropanovic, Paul Gilbert from the Australian Nursing Federation, who is Assistant State Secretary, who's flown in this afternoon for the purpose of being here, and then Dr. Barry Doughty. At the end of the speeches, the speakers will form a panel and you'll be invited to ask questions of the speakers. Not make a speech yourself, but ask questions. If everyone in this hall spoke for 1 minute, we'd be here for 8 hours. So I'll call upon your good nature to just confine your questions to questions and not a lengthy preamble as well. Now, apologies are from Dr. Terry Cook. Dr. Cook was organised to come, well prepared and anxious to be here, but for personal reasons he is unable to be here, which is regrettable. Dr. Arnold Jago rang me at home on Tuesday morning to say that he couldn't be here because he has to attend a family birthday party. Mr. Rod Atkins from Nichols Point sent me an email saying that he'd like to be here but can't, and could I act as his proxy in any vote. So if we have a vote on something, and if the votes are even, he might swing it one way or another. Peter Crisp, our local member, is on his way. Parliament is sitting, and he rang me from Melbourne at 5 o'clock to say that he is heading for Mildura and hoped to be here by 8 o'clock, but would I please read out to the meeting an email that he'd sent. Because he's our local elected member, I think that's fair enough, and I'll grab it from my briefcase and read it to you. And just bear with me while I read it through. As I say, it's a bit lengthy. He says, "I'm sorry that I'm unable to join the meeting until 8 p.m. or thereabouts. Parliament has been sitting today and it's the earliest I can get there, flights permitting. I want what's best for the people of Mildura and surrounding district. I do not have an ideological position on whether the base hospital should be under public or private management. Many in the community would judge the hospital as having performed well under the management of Ramsay Healthcare. Equally, I know there are strong views that public is best when it comes to the provision of health and hospital care. What cannot be disputed is that Mildura and district deserves the best possible hospital service. We deserve special consideration because of our remoteness and because a significant proportion of our community do not have the means to travel to hospitals in Melbourne, Bendigo or Adelaide. What cannot be disputed is that the base hospital must evolve to match community expectations. Service must keep pace with development in medical science and technology. Private management or public management in this renegotiation phase, both must be put to the test. Both must be asked and both must be forthcoming in telling us what they can deliver. Enough information must be given so that the community can make an informed decision. The community must be vocal in demanding what's best for Mildura District. As your local member, I will be involved in this process. I will take community feedback to the government, and I will be doing my utmost to make sure that the outcome is one that provides the most benefit. I believe the government has listened and will continue to listen. In the 18 months of the coalition government, I've been engaged in helping attract an additional $16.4 million for improvement in accident and emergency, maternity and mental health services at the hospital. Extra facilities have also been earmarked for enhanced teaching and training opportunities for the health workforce. However, I also recognise that there is much more to be done as the community grows and demands intensify. I will continue to work with the community on the delivery of health services. So that's Peter Crisp's email to me about his view about what the community ought to do. I think I hear a scratching noise in the ceiling. I think it's the ghost of the old bookmaker who used to service the membership of the Mildura Settlers Club, and he's writing out a betting ticket for Crispy, and it's a ticket saying 2 bob each way on Mildura Base Hospital in the Ramsay Stakes. Crispy won't mind me saying that, he knows me well enough. I find that we're distantly related to our mutual delight. Can you cast your minds back to the days, the bad old days when we lost the Vinelander train? And sometime after that, somebody hung a huge banner from the Tullamarine Freeway from an overpass on the freeway. And as you headed north up the freeway and looked in your rear vision mirror, you could read what it said on the banner, and it said, "You are now leaving Victoria." So I'm told. It was only there for a couple of days, as I understand it. In the meantime, things have changed dramatically, haven't they? I mean, Melbourne has expanded exponentially. Geelong, Bendigo and Ballarat are now outer suburbs of Melbourne. People commute from those places to Melbourne to work and back at night by train. This is called regional development. In the meantime, here we are stuck 600 kilometres from the capital city of Victoria, 425 kilometres from the regional centre of the region called Loddon Mallee, of which we're apparently a part. And we have the only base hospital in regional Victoria owned and operated by a corporation set up for the purpose of making a profit, Ramsay Healthcare. Somebody said to me earlier tonight when I was talking at the front door, listen, Burnsy, what would you know about hospitals? Well, that's a fair question. I know a bit. I was on the committee of management of the publicly owned base hospital for 8 years. I was chairman of the finance committee for 7 of those 8 years and honorary treasurer of the hospital, granted life governorship at the end of the term, so I know a bit, but I am far from qualified to talk about the effect of privatisation of our base hospital on the community. The people on the panel are much better qualified than I, and I'll call on the first speaker, Mr. Kevin Chambers, General Surgeon. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks very much, Peter. And thank you. I have an invitation here from the organising committee sent to me by the convener to be here tonight, and I thank them for the invitation to get off my chest what I have been thinking of for some time. Peter Byrne I remember when he was on the old Mildura Base Hospital board, I was actually an invitee there as a chairman of the medical staff group, and the first thing I remember about him was that he ended up on one side of the table standing up in a boardroom meeting. It was a big oval table with his white knuckles on the board glaring at me, and I was on the other side of the table glaring at him, and we were both shouting at each other, and it wasn't an edifying experience for anyone, I'm sure. But he has lent himself to this meeting, and I think the town should be grateful for that. He does have a track record. On his watch, Nawinji was beaten down, and I think the whole community can always be very grateful for that. Having said that, I'm never going to see eye to eye with this bloke on a lot of things. I mean, we are diametrically opposed on so many issues. So I thank him for putting that to one side and allowing me to speak tonight. The journey to this evening commenced obviously with the privatisation of the hospital. I've worked at the hospital for 29 years and 12 years with the Ramsay Group, who've run the hospital. And what we lost at the beginning of that was an issue of salary packaging, and that was the first thing I wanted to bring to the attention of management, that the staff were being disadvantaged, and a number of us, including Dr Cook and myself, brought this up continually, and it drove them all nuts, and they just said we couldn't do anything about it. The reason we're here now is because I didn't realise, and I don't think many people knew, that the new contract for the Mildura Base Hospital, another 15 years, was going to be decided 3 years before the old contract expired. Now, this would have just been a fait accompli. We would have been told, oh, I wonder what's happening to the hospital. Oh, so we've already signed those contracts, they're all done and dusted and away. There would be no opportunity. So as soon as we found out that that was going to happen perhaps this year, and negotiations were going on and are going on, then there developed a little urgency in terms of doing something about that, because we will have had 15 years of privatisation. I then sat down and wrote a letter. It took 3 months to write the letter because I had to take out all the nasty things that I tend to write about, and I ran it past my wife and my children who are lawyers, and I ran it past our defamation people, you name it, we ran it through everyone, and eventually all the nasty words were taken out, and so I sent the letter and I never heard any more about it. I sent it to lots of copies to lots of other people, and so I'm not here tonight to slag Ramsay's, all right? This is not my purpose. Ramsay's are running a hospital down there and we all depend on it. It's the place to go. If you're desperately sick, that's where you go. And you'll find people there to treat you. What I'm here about is the concept of privatising your hospital and what it will mean. So you can say, okay, what's this guy on about? Well, every time I got up and said anything in the past, it was because I had a vested interest. Well, you know, I don't think I got a vested interest. These guys here don't have a vested interest in getting up and speaking about this, and I'm willing to debate that with anyone at a later time. So, why should you be concerned? A privately run hospital is there to make a profit. We don't expect companies to make losses, we want them to make profits in our society. But to do that in health services, you might have to trim services, personnel, and charge for the services. When this joint was privatised, they were told that no one would be worse off I remember these words being spoken. All the employees would be treated the same as every other employee in every other hospital of the state. It's clearly not the case. The hospital and the community is disadvantaged. Now, these are the things that I want to make points about. The first one's difficult. There's no salary packaging in this hospital. Now, a lot of you don't get salary packaging, but people who work in public hospitals get it because they work for less than the private sector. So the government said, OK, well, we'll help those, so we don't have to pay, so governments don't have to pay full-toed odds, we'll give them a tax advantage, the people who work for them. So that's why those people are entitled to that, and that's what this community doesn't get for its workforce. So some things can be paid out of money before you pay tax on it. You have to be a public benevolent institution to do this, so public hospitals can do it. And it's very beneficial to them in attracting a good workforce. It adds 20 to 30% to the wages of those people who work in the hospital. This is just not doctors, this is nurses, this is even administrators and cleaners and the other technicians that we have in the hospital. They're all being disadvantaged, and this flows on to you. So this is available in every other public hospital in Australia. Not available here. This is a joint that doesn't have it. So it becomes an unattractive employer. So not only are we hamstrung by the other things that have been mentioned, you can't offer these people what they can get elsewhere. There's less income, you know, to the staff, so less income's going to be spent in Mildura, and you're going to have less domiciled, highly qualified people here because they can do better elsewhere. More money, if they fly in and fly out, they don't leave the money here, they take it with them and they spend it elsewhere. The Mildura community is suffering for that. You've already lost, I reckon, $70 million. Now, I don't know how many times that goes around. Economists could tell you that. It goes around and around the community, and most people get a slice of that, but it's been gone from here. So up to now, I reckon it's at least that amount of dough that's been lost to this community. We can ill afford to do that with all the other things that are happening to our community. All right, the community interests may be secondary. So if you're running a hospital like this. So what we have is an increase in fly-in, fly-out doctors. So there's less incentive to treat people here. The hospital, for its emergency service, is relying on a lot of locums. These people don't have a great incentive to treat here. If I'm working here and I live here and I get to see people, I don't want to send them out of town. I know that disrupts their family. Also, the people that I'm thinking, they'll think, oh, Jesus, you know, this guy, he can't handle something as simple as that. Well, I've got a reputation. If you're going to live in a joint like this and do what we do, you've got to have a reputation to be able to do it. You can't keep slagging off your reputation and sloughing stuff out of town. Well, that's what's happening at the moment, because a lot of people think, well, I'm here for 2 weeks, why should I take on a difficult case like that? I'll just send it out of town. I won't have to worry about it. I'll just sit around, get my locum fee, and that's what's happening, unfortunately. So we are doing less complicated treatments. These are my impressions, all right? I don't have, you know, statistics for you, but these are my impressions, and these are the things that I'm here to tell you. So less complicated treatments means that our staff, all the nurses, all the other people, we're getting de-skilled. We're not doing the things that require us to be pressured to do, you know, high-end stuff anymore. So income to Mildura is lost, continuity of care is lost. So The locum comes, cuts the guy open, sews him up. He finished his locum Monday morning, he's gone. Who looked after this guy? You know, this was one of the very big issues that I had with the hospital. They need to appoint someone to look after these people who are being treated. And there was no move made to do this. So continuity of care is important. The hospitals had, in view of the interests of secondary, the hospitals had a very high occupancy rate for, and in fact it's interesting, since about September last year the occupancy rate has fallen, but for 2 years before that we had 110% occupancy there. So the bed, as soon as the bed was empty, was filled again. Even the socialist professors of medicine in universities think that you can't have more than 85% occupancy in a public hospital, but we had 110%. We had that consistently for a couple of years. Okay, now medical personnel are short term. Mildura is seen as a good place. I mean, you've all had experience of this. How many of you have had GP? Oh, I've got a nice new GP there. See the GP, get a relationship with the GP, and then 2 years down the track, gone. You know, it happens all the time. This is not only happening in GP land, it's happening in specialist land. And it's a good place to come. Mildura is seen as a good place to come. You can get your Australian qualifications here, you get experience here, you get time off to do exams here, and then you can leave here. And that's what's happening. And we've had lots of people come through and do that. So, locums, if you thought you could attract people by making them locums and they would stay, they're not doing it. They're not staying for the reasons which I'll mention. You can't keep them here because conditions elsewhere are better. There's little influence to improve care. We don't have a lot of influence to improve care as medico's there, and elsewhere is much more attractive. All right, surgical care, what about it? This is something I know a little bit about. All the other stuff, probably. I know about this. 12 years ago, this was a really sought after place. The trainees that come up that want to become surgeons come to Mildura. We got 4 a year. And they come up here and we take them through stuff and we show them stuff, and they loved it because we had good training and good numbers that they could see. We were accredited by the College of Surgeons, the teaching hospitals in Melbourne. Now, this didn't happen as a matter of course. It doesn't happen as a matter of course. It doesn't happen just because you happen to have a base hospital. When I came here, there were about 8 residents at the base hospital. That's all we had, resident doctors there, you know, junior doctors. That's all we had there. Now, by dint of the work of these guys and others like them, this place improved its reputation. People like Foxy and Farrell and those guys, I mean, we improved the reputation here. So these places started to take notice and say, well, we actually had to ask for about 12 years, but after about 8 years, they said, oh, OK, we'll send you trainees. So they did. And we've had trainees here for about 18 years now, and they've loved to come here. But it doesn't happen as a matter of, and I believe that Ramsay's thought this was just normal. Of course you had trainees come. This is a hospital, and you had it doesn't happen that way. You have to have these people say it's a good place to go for our young people to learn how to behave and be surgeons. We had it. We cannot attract surgeons now for lots of reasons. The trainees that we've had have been downgraded. We used to have what we called second-year trainees, surgical trainees. Well, now we're getting unaccredited ones. These are much junior ones than we got before because the hospital was not able to do the work to provide the evidence. All this is evidenced. The trainees must keep a logbook, a log of what they do, and our logs were terrific for all those years until the last couple of years. Well, you couldn't get people in the joint to operate on. So, you know, the logbooks are looking paltry. The college is sitting down there looking at the logbook saying, Jesus, you know, what's happened to these guys? And the parent hospitals are saying, Christ, our guys aren't getting any operating to do. We were going to pull them out. So they pulled them out. So we get much more junior people. So when you get up to the hospital there, you don't see someone who's senior who I can rely on. You see someone much more junior. So we also for years used to supervise overseas trained surgeons who wanted to become Australian surgeons, and we had that as a role that we fulfilled. Well, because they couldn't get any work in the joint, they've had to say, well, sorry, you can't supervise them anymore. We've lost that. Now, maybe it's me, I don't know. Maybe I'm the dinosaur. But, you know, I don't think so. But maybe that's right. You would have to judge that. So why can't we attract surgeons? We don't have packaging for their salary either, and they're given a low priority. They're in the operating room. General surgeons like me, we compete with other much more lucrative types of surgery, and these are the things that hospitals want to do because they get more payment for those things. So generally speaking, what happens is down the bottom you'll see there's poor access to theatre during the day for urgent cases. So I'd see a case at 10 in the morning, you couldn't do it until about 7 or 8 at night, and then probably a Caesar would come in, so it'd be 10 o'clock. You do it at 10 o'clock at night. You're supposed to get up the next morning and have a normal day. Well, you're buggered. So what we have here is a 1 in 4 roster. For most of my working life here, it's been a 1 in 3 roster. Every third night and every third weekend, there's been a surgeon available for this town since I got here. Until recently, it's became a 1 in 4 roster. Well, that was nice, but then I stopped doing urgent work. But it's still a 1 in 4 roster. But if you want to be a surgeon, go down to Melbourne, go to a big city, you can have a 1 in 10 roster. People don't ring you up, you know, on Saturday night down there, except once in a blue moon, when you happen to fall on a weekend that you're on call. You only get a day, 1 in 10, 1 in 14, something like that. We are so far from Melbourne. It's hard with the partners that people might have to come here. This is all why we can't get surgeons here. We have a lack of anaesthetists. We've had the anaesthetists that were here when Ramsay took over. I think they've all gone now, and we have a new crop who are quite, you know, these are nice people, and but for years we've had locum anaesthetists as well. Now, what about the nursing staff? I think our nursing staff probably get less income than elsewhere, and that's not good. Nursing people are trained, skilled professionals that need to be encouraged by us, and, you know, we must fight for the nurses to get a better deal. So their income has been pared back by the lack of salary packaging. I think it is enormous. If you're on, I don't know what nurses get, even maybe 60 grand a year or something, say they got that. Well, if you were talking 20% of that plus, well, in 10 years they've paid for their house. I mean, that was what would have happened. But they're not getting that. So we're not going to be able to attract them. We're going to get less challenging cases because less is done there and more of it's flown out of the joint. There's more stress for them here. They are told to do more with less. So many times you might have a problem with a patient It's creeping up to 5 o'clock and you've got another case to do. Some poor bugger's been waiting all afternoon for their operation, and they're running around trying to see if a nurse can stay back, instead of picking up her kids or seeing her husband or cooking tea or whatever they do, or going to the gym. But can they stay back, you know? And this puts pressure on them. So, and they are the brunt of the complaints. Of course, they come to me and they say, you know, oh no, we haven't got a nurse. No one can stay back. That patient has to be counted. Oh, Christ. So I go off my nut at the nurses, you know, and because that's stressful for me. It's very stressful for the patient, mind you, I would think, to sort of be told, sorry, rack off home, you're not getting your operation today. I mean, that is bad. So they are the brunt. I mean, when we can't even get a patient in, there's a nurse who does that. What's she called? The bed manager. And they ring up and they say, oh, sorry, can't get that gallbladder person in there. Well, I go nuts then as well, and like all surgeons would, because then you're going to sit on your bum and do nothing because they can't get a patient into the hospital. Not happening that much now because there are more beds seem to be available, but they've been the brunt of that. And that's not a very good place for them to be. All right, what was not made public? It's an interesting thing. The government owns the land where the hospital is. It's leased, the land is leased to the Motor Traders Association of Australia superannuation fund by the government. The Motor Traders Association fund own the buildings, and from what I'm led to believe, the Motor Traders Association engages Ramsay's to run the hospital. So I don't know how many steps that is from you as a public owning a hospital, as a public hospital, but it's getting very complicated when you've got this sort of arrangement. So I never knew that until recently. Now, this is the promised new stuff. Mr Crisp has mentioned all this stuff, $16.5 million, and this was going to enlarge the accident and emergency holding beds. Well, who would want to stay in the accident and emergency department longer? I don't know, but it's not a nice place to be. I'd rather be in a ward, but it takes a long time to get into a ward from there. There are no general beds, no new general beds in the promise coming up. There's one new midwifery bed. Well, that's nice, one. No one could complain about an upgrade mental health, and there's accommodation for rotating staff so they're not living in squalor like some of them say they are now. Well, all I can say is, when is this going to happen? I mean, you know, how many times have you been told as a community, yeah, we're going to fix the waterfront, we've got all the money, here's $10 million, it's earmarked? Well, nothing ever happens because it gets unearmarked and used for something else. Well, I mean, you must hold these people to account. They've said they're going to spend this dough, even though I wouldn't agree with what they're spending it on. They still should spend it. What they should be spending it on is more beds in the general hospital and better quality of employment for their employees. So, what we didn't know when this joint was proposed, you know, there's that guy Rumsfeld. Now, it's a tragedy this guy's going to go down in history. He was the Secretary of State under George Bush. And he said this thing, that this is all he's going to be remembered for, this bloke. He said, there are knowns that we know and knowns that we don't know. I'm sure you must have seen this on YouTube or something. And then there are unknowns that we know and unknowns that we don't know. And then there are unknowns that we know that we don't know. And unknowns that we don't know we don't know. I mean, you can go on, and that's what he'll be famous for. And this is the stuff that we didn't know. I didn't know. I mean, we thought we was pretty smart people. We're looking at all this stuff. Oh, yeah, this is what these guys are going to do. OK, well, we're not smart enough. We didn't have that sort of vision to see into this. But anyway, these are things. No new beds were going to be available. No new beds. So that's interesting, isn't it? Who would build a bed if you didn't own it? Now, with the motor traders owning the buildings, they don't want another bed. They have to build it, it costs them money. They're not going to get any more money from the state government. Ramsay's don't want another bed because the patient will probably get into it and they'll have to pay to treat them. I mean, who wants a new bed? I mean, no one wants a new bed. So you don't get any more new bed. There's been no bed added for 12 years to your hospital. It was already too small. So you got no new beds were possible because you had these... Government didn't want another bed because Ramsay then asked them for more money. So none of these parties want any more beds. No salary packaging for staff, we didn't know that because we were told that, no one was going to get that. No one in Australia was going to get it from the... Well, no point in arguing about it if no one's going to get it. But that didn't happen either, and that's disadvantaged us. If no one got it, then we'd be on a level playing field, but we're not. So we didn't know that a new lease, I didn't, was going to be arranged 3 years before the old one expired. I didn't know that until about 8 months ago. That was a revelation to me. They're organising it now. So when you start to think about it in, it's supposed to kick over in 2015, when in 2014 kicks along, you think, oh, what's that new contract going to be? That's already going to be done. It would have been done. This is a private hospital. It's been gazetted as a private hospital. It's not a public hospital at all. The community board, I thought, had been sidelined. Their only input, I think, has probably been from the chief executive, whoever that's been at the time, and, that person is then in a position to control all knowledge. There's no full-time medical director. There has not been a full-time medical director until about the last couple of months. They've appointed one. Well, it took 12 years to get one, but I guess we've got one now. That's fine. We'll see how that pans out. We have no full-time pathologist. Even that is in the contract. They can't get one. Well, you can't get one if you don't pay for one. If you're going to pay him 70 grand to come up here and live up here and be our full-time pathologist, you're not going to get one. If you're going to pay him 700,000 bucks, you probably get few. But, that's what it comes down to. If you want nurses, if you say you haven't got enough nurses, well, maybe you have to pay them a bit more to come and live and work in Mildura. Well, big deal. Too bad. That's what you have to do. You can't just say we don't have enough. I don't think you can. So, local surgeons have been disadvantaged here. We didn't know that was going to happen. They can't get their urgent case. We didn't know that. We didn't know we'd end up with less experienced junior staff. We didn't know we'd have to rely on these locum surgeons and these. I used to turn up the list when all this was happening, and I got a different anaesthetist. That's like some guy running a company and every day gets a different secretary at the, to take his phone calls, make his, when does he have his coffee, or what does he do now, and it's just a shambles. You walk in there, there's some guy who's going to put all your patients to sleep, and you don't know if he is up to it. You've got to take someone else's bloody word for it. The administration have said, yeah, he can come and put people to sleep for you. Oh, okay. Well, sometimes they take half an hour, sometimes they can do it quick. You get good, you get bad. You get, you get what you get. Now, what's been lost here? Well, what I feel most is reputation. This joint has lost its reputation. My dad told me, look mate, you can't change the world, but if you work your guts out and you do okay, and in your particular little sphere of influence, you make things a little tiny bit better, and then you drop dead, you've probably done okay. That's what he thought. And I've adopted that as a philosophical standpoint, and unfortunately, and I apologise to you all, that when I stopped going to Mildura Base Hospital, well, it may be in a worse situation than when I found it. And I am truly, truly angry and sorry about that. We've lost our surgeons and anaesthetists. We've lost local skills. We've lost this, community input. I remember going down to the show and I'd go rock up to the chocolate wheel where the guys were running. I'd buy all the bloody tickets so I could get for $30 so I could get an $8 chair, you know, but that's what everyone did, you know. So that's what people do, and you feel good. The blokes who are getting the money for the hospital feel good. We've lost this. We've lost community input. So that's a real tragedy to me. But we've lost income for Mildura. Who should care about it? All of you, patients and their families. Business people should care. Traders, you know, tradesmen. We get no growth, we get less income. Other doctors should care because our reputation is not being enhanced. I don't think the Department of Health cares. I mean, there may be a representative from them here. Maybe they do care. Minister for Health, I don't know whether he cares. He didn't respond to my letter that I wrote in November. Our local politicians, Mr Crisp has demonstrated that he does have a little bit of insight there, and I applaud him for making such a statement of openness to discuss issues. And some councillors, I don't think, care too much. Some do. You got 18 years. This is 18 years. If they get another contract, that's 3 now, another 15. Well, who am I to say that that's not going to be better under privatisation than under public ownership? I'm not. I can't say that. Who has that sort of knowledge? No one, God. I don't. And neither do you. But we should be at least engaged in a debate to determine how you think your hospital should go. And that's what I think you should be thinking about. So, the way forward, I say, contact your representatives, your councillors, your local members, the government people, and, you know, the local media, and debate the issue. Thanks for that.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Could I introduce Dr. Vasa Skorapanovic, a long-serving general practitioner whom many of you know personally. Thanks, Vasa.
What a very hard act to follow. Thanks for inviting me to speak, Peter. This is probably time to tone it down a little bit and give you some of my impressions as a GP who's worked in this town for 40 years. I've also worked at different levels in the health system here, particularly in the old base hospital. I'm a life governor. I was on the board for 12 years and president for 2 from 1987 to 89. Like many other local doctors now, I don't have any contract with the base hospital, and I have no, therefore, vested interest in this debate other than to seek a better health outcome for the local community, as I'm sure every thinking person that came here tonight would agree. Just leaving politics and the philosophy of this debate aside for 1 minute, The current debate hasn't covered what I consider to be a deeper concern for me, and I refer to two matters in particular. One is that we've seen a fragmentation of medical services over the last 12 years or so, and I'm concerned that there appears to be nobody actually leading an agenda or offering an agenda for ensuring the delivery of appropriate medical services to our community. The old base hospital provided nearly all of our medical services, including nursing home beds, community health, domiciliary nursing and the like. Now that all these services are off-site, they've got their own bucket of funding and some of them have been privatised. We've been left with what I consider to be a fairly bare-boned new hospital that was created, but we lost a focal point for the capacity to communicate effectively enough with one another through these groups to get any agendas set. Now, I'm not implying that the old system was without its faults, but what I am implying is that privatisation has really divided our medical community. Some current examples of low communication and possible duplication without due process might be, for example, the introduction recently of 2 MRI scanners when we had none. Neither of these are sanctioned by Medicare. The possible opening of 2 pain management clinics, which we desperately need, but one by the base hospital and possibly one from Medicare locals. And a current oversupply of nursing home beds. Now, this is unheard of for me, having been here for 40 years, but there are actually empty nursing home beds in our town. Now, yet we're hearing that another 10 will open at Chafee Aged Care, and there's a new 100-bed facility being opened in Mildura soon. All this within the framework of keeping our infirmed aged in their own homes according to the recent federal budget, which has bipartisan support. Given that the new base hospital was a fait accompli, many of us were initially excited by the prospect of privatisation, hoping that it would become a modern centre of excellence, both for continuing what we had and for maybe some new services, hopefully improving teaching and even possibly for research. Sadly, in my opinion, this has not been the case. Now, in amongst all the other issues that are being presented to you this evening, I just want to highlight what I consider to be some of the significant issues, and some of them might be, again, you've already heard from Kevin, but I'll just tell you what my thoughts are. Now, I looked at the vision statement for Ramsay Healthcare, and it said committed to caring. Its mission statement is working with the community to achieve the best outcomes. Well, first of all, there's been a loss of esprit de corps in our community, as Kevin's already highlighted. No more Easter fundraising, no men's auxiliary and the like. There's about $1 million belonging to the old hospital foundation raised by the local community, which sits in some unprocurable limbo land. I think there's been a loss of focus and leadership and direction, with persistent and careful avoidance of any meaningful engagement with the local community, with local medical practitioners and the Mildura private hospital to set any agendas and coordinate care. Most local GPs in the previous hospital setting had visiting rights and were members of the staff group. Now there are very few involved with the base hospital in any meaningful way whatsoever. They have not been encouraged back, so there's no longer a central forum for specialist GPs and others to get together and have a discussion on where we should go, what we need in the community. The persistent obfuscation that goes on in regard to the running of the base hospital and the quality of its services that requires this so-called box ticking to satisfy the Victorian Government contractual agreement, I feel there should be a responsible, independent arbiter to assess how well our base hospital performs. As Kevin said, there's been a lack of consistently effective directorship in terms of the medical services in the hospital for the last 12 years. Has already been highlighted employing high-cost, low-productivity medical staff that are basically confined to treating people in the hospital, locums that come and go. There are long lead times for off-campus outpatient services, which are not free for pensioners. You know, perhaps it might have been wiser to involve other interested parties when advertising for staff, rather than rely on what Ramsay provides alone. As has already been mentioned, a toothless community advisory board that needs, in the CEO's own terms, beefing up. After 12 years, if you look at the website, it's still under construction, so that one cannot determine composition, let alone what its role is. You know, we used to have a committee of management that was made up of community leaders who sent delegations to Spring Street when shortfalls were perceived. For example, getting our first CAT scanner. As already has been mentioned, we have no resident pathologist. And, you know, autopsies, for example, need to be sent to Melbourne, which is an awful burden for the families in Mildura. Now, once we prided ourselves with a service provision retention rate of something like 94%. What that means is that 6 out of 100 cases couldn't be treated locally and had to be flown out. I can only wonder what that figure is now. The other point I'd like to make is that some of us continue to watch with envy at Victorian budget time when we see what's provided to areas with the so-called swinging seats. Like Geelong, $93 million for 64 new beds. Bendigo last year, $102 million for a new hospital. Ballarat, $46 million for a helipad facility. Read into that 12 wasted years for Mildura. Now, the only obvious way for any privatised model to make profit for shareholders is obviously to keep the costs down, and to do that we need to screw down service provision and service providers. Despite all of the CEO's quite public recent reassurances, I still don't hear or read any glowing praise from his employees. Now, why would Ramsay Health Care even want to consider renewing the contract? That's a reasonable question to ask, as it doesn't own the building or the land and has no room to expand in order to satisfy the needs of a growing population with a very high over 65-year-old age group. You know, our growth rate's still in the order of 1% per annum, which is quite remarkable. The other major player is Spring Street, and in my opinion, the factor left out of this equation is the Sunraysia community. Recent means testing of private health insurance is an unknown which could also put further strain on the public hospital system. Could it be that Ramsay Health Care wants to maintain a strategic local presence to satisfy its intention to seek other privatisation opportunities? I believe so. It recently lost a bid for the 360-bed Midlands Public Hospital in Perth to St John of God. Given our remoteness, we should have one of the best base hospitals in Victoria, and I firmly believe the community does need to be involved, regardless of who runs the base hospital. If Ramsay, the council, successive governments show little transparent interest in our needs and wishes, then you'll be effectively disenfranchised from the process once again. There'll be nobody up forward to kick our goals. Don't let Sunraysia become a medical backwater. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Faza. By the way, these medical gentlemen are not ones to blow their bags, but I can tell you now that each of them is a life governor of the old base hospital for services rendered to that base hospital. Vasa mentioned the Mildura Base Hospital Foundation. I actually set it up when I was on the committee and treasurer and in legal practice, and it is in limbo. It's non-operational. There's $1 million of community money in that foundation, but it was set up specifically for the benefit of the Mildura community, not Ramsay Health. So that's one more problem with our privatised system. All right, you've heard two medical practitioners. Could I now call on Mr Paul Gilbert, who is the Assistant State Secretary of the Australian Nursing Federation, who flew from Melbourne to Mildura to be with us tonight.
I should point out I had an aeroplane. It wasn't as hard as he makes it out to be. I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle than the other two speakers have. For my sins, I started nursing 25 years ago and started working for the Australian Nursing Federation some 19 to 20 years ago. At that time, I started off in Bendigo and then moved to Gippsland and represented our nurses and midwives in Gippsland, which confused me for a long time because every night when the weather was on, I couldn't even find it on the map. Somewhere in my brain I thought Victoria finished somewhere before there, but once I lived there I had to grow accustomed to that. And it was a sad time for that town. I lived in Morwell, and on one side of Morwell you've got Traralgon, which always seems to do pretty well, and on the other side you've got Moe that's there to make people in Morwell feel better. And Moe had its own public hospital, and Traralgon had its own public hospital, and Morwell's hospital had been closed some years earlier. When we had the Kennett government come in Victoria, one of their decisions was to introduce the first privatisation of a public hospital in Victoria, and that was the privatisation of the Moe and Traralgon hospitals and their replacement with the La Trobe Regional Hospital, which they cutely referred to as being in Morwell East, which was in fact in Traralgon, on the side of the Traralgon Drive-In. So it was obviously a great political idea at the time to pretend it was in Morwell, but everyone who lived there knew it wasn't. It was in Traralgon, and they just renamed a suburb and gave it a different postcode so it looked like it was in Morwell when it wasn't. People bled for those hospitals. They were not. It's not a high income area. People put their own money aside. They made deductions out of their salary at the SEC to build those hospitals. They were their hospitals. They weren't the government's to sell, but they did. And the fight that the Moe people in particular put up to save that hospital was absolutely fantastic, but they lost. But they didn't lose for long. They kept that pressure on. In the local newspaper, whenever there was a bad news story to be had about health, it was directed back at the privatisation. And when the change of government occurred in 1999, shortly thereafter, the hospital returned to public hands, and they won that fight. You know, a lot of people, you've got to never give up that fight. 12 years is a very long time. The fight you need to have is to have it now, as people have said. You've got this window of opportunity, but you need to get your politicians to be upfront about it. You know, that was a very nice email from Peter Crisp that I heard Peter read out. But it didn't actually say, we want the hospital to return to public hands. It's to be tested, public versus private, tested against what public option is there to be tested against? There is no public hospital here to test it against. It's very, very difficult to understand what their proposal is about testing it. Whether you like it or not, it is a political issue. I don't care which way you vote, but make sure the person you choose to vote for supports the return of the hospital to public hands in Mildura. It's that simple. It crosses all political boundaries. To the extent anyone thought that privatisation was going to be successful, go back and look at Latrobe Regional Hospital. Australian Hospital Care, who operated that as the private operator, couldn't make money out of it. I was there in a meeting on one occasion with them, not long after they took over, and they had, the government had estimated that there would be a certain number of hours of treatment for mental health patients in the community in the Traralgon-Moe area. That number was much, much greater than the government had estimated it would be. And the hospital management were left with the idea, with the choice of either operating at a loss or not providing that mental health care to the community. In fairness to AHC, they did the best they could with the money they had, but people were missing out on care that they would have got in any other hospital, in any other city in Victoria. But because AHC, the government could blame AHC. The government would say, well, they have a contract to provide services. It's AHC's fault, not our fault. I heard Vasa before, and I'll just, Ramsay's motto, working with the community to improve healthcare. Well, that's very honourable of them. But it's the government's responsibility to work with the community to improve healthcare, not Ramsay's. It's your representatives that you elect to government who go to Spring Street. It's their responsibility to ensure that your community gets improved healthcare. I'd love to be able to stand up here. I'd love to be able to stand up here and say, well, you've got less beds per head, or you've got more of this or less of that. Statistics, 93% of them are made up. You can't. The best example is what was mentioned before about the short stay beds in emergency departments. They are being put in there to avoid breaking a rule that affects the funding, all right? If you stay in ED for too long, then you lose funding. So you move them to this other new area that's in ED called short stay, and in there that's where you keep them and you don't lose the funding. Statistics are very, very difficult things because for all intents and purposes that person is no longer an ED patient, they're now a ward patient because they moved from that bed to that bed in the same area. That's what statistics do. You won't be able to find easily whether you are better off or worse off than any other community in terms of public hospital services. But I can tell you anecdotally, go to Bendigo. Remember what Bendigo was like 10 years ago and look at Bendigo now and look at what Bendigo's got coming. 100 million, that's a quarter of what they've got coming over the forecast in the budget for a new hospital. Go to Ballarat, have a look at Ballarat now versus Ballarat 10 years ago. Have a look, if you don't think that it's a fair comparison, have a look at Echuca getting a new hospital. Have a look at Warrnambool, just got a new hospital. Have a look at Wonthaggi getting a new hospital built. Any of the base hospitals have got everything that you've got and more and stayed in public hands. I wish I could give you better figures than that, but if you go and look, you see those hospitals, you see where they've come from. And what you still see is that sense of community of the people who work there, the people who volunteer there, the people who are proud to call it, health has always been more than, very few people can make their million in public health, I can tell you that. And nurses are absolutely no exception. It's a bigger picture thing when you work in health. It's that kind of making a difference thing that people talk about. You're part of something that's making a difference. But you can't get that same feel when you're working for a private company. It just isn't there. It's something you ought to be proud of, to work for your local community hospital, whatever size it is. But regrettably, that feeling isn't there when your efforts are going to reward a private company. It's just the way it is. Our members at Mildura deserve to have that heart back again when they're at work, like every other public sector nurse in this state. I think Kevin touched on, just briefly, salary packaging. Might have mentioned it once. You know, our members in Moe and Traralgon, when it was privatised, lost their salary packaging. They also lost their superannuation. That is, they had to go outside the public service superannuation fund that they were in. They're big ticket issues. You know, make no mistake, if you've got a choice between working in Swan Hill and working in Mildura and getting paid 10, 15% more effectively in Swan Hill than Mildura, it's going to weigh on your mind for doing the same work, and you're working for a public hospital where you can feel a bit proud about what you're doing, and you know that your efforts are going, if you're saving money in the way you're working and you're improving healthcare, that's going to improving your hospital. It's not going to improving Paul Ramsey's back pocket. You know, that is a significant issue, the salary packaging. I can't, it's not, you know, it's one of the equal issues. I think the heart still outdoes the wallet on this one, but it is a significant issue. To me, governments have 3 or 4 fundamental responsibilities. You know, one, you know, everyone would say, well, law and order, obviously. And thankfully, that hasn't been privatised to date. Education is another one. Everyone wants their kids to be well educated. Everyone wants access to good education. That's another government responsibility. Health, for heaven's sake, has got to be the number one, doesn't it? A government responsibility. How can you transfer that risk to Ramsay's or to AHC when it's the government's responsibility to meet that obligation? It's not good enough for them to say, we've got a contract, they've got to do it, it's their fault if it doesn't happen. No, it's the government's fault if it doesn't happen. If you want to have a look at what happens when a public hospital mucks up, and I'm not going to say any more because I'm being videoed and I'll be sued, but go to Bairnsdale Regional Health Services website and download the report on what's been happening at that health service, where they took money saving to a new level. Now, no, I'm not going to say more. You read the report, and if you want to know what happens to a public hospital when it tries to save too much money at the expense of providing health services, go and have a read of that report and make your own judgment about the bits that have been redacted from the report, from the public report. Make your own judgment about that. As to where you want to go in the future with this, you know, we've had the longest dispute in our history with this government. All right? It went for 7 months or something. We decided at one point in that dispute there was only one way we were going to win it, and that was to annoy and frustrate. Annoy and frustrate. Any of you who have had kids know how damn successful it is, and we laughed about it to ourselves. You know, I want a biscuit, I want a biscuit, no, I want a biscuit, no, I want a biscuit, no, I want a biscuit, one bloody biscuit. You know, eventually you just get cheesed off and you want it fixed. And that's what we did. In our terms of our dispute, we were everywhere the Premier was, we went. We didn't all go to India really, but we did have friends over there who dressed in the same T-shirts and looked very positive. We couldn't afford that, but we did. I mean, and that's what you've got to do. You know, you've got to be proud of what it is that you're trying to achieve, have a public way of showing that you're one of the people who feels that way, and it's not going to be the weather for T-shirts. And I was talking to some of the people earlier, we had flags that you can put on your car, and a lot of people had them at Christmas with strange moose ears or something on them. And you can just put them on the window of your car. And it's just a sign that you are one of the people who support the reclaiming the base. And whenever you're driving around, whenever you're in a car park somewhere, whenever a politician is driving along, or a local council or a federal politician or whoever, they know when they see that flag, you're one of the people who they need to think about if they want to get elected again. And you need that stuff going around all the time, non-stop. Always confront your local member whenever you can. Don't give up. You will win, because you know, you've proven before, and I'm sure your local member is well aware, that it's not inconceivable that this seat could change hands. I look with some interest at, if anyone's familiar with the area around Shepparton, and the highway that goes up past through Shepparton up to Cobden. The funny thing about that area is when every other hospital in Victoria was amalgamated with each other forcibly, and hospitals were privatised, nothing happened in that area. Cobram Hospital still sits there on its own. Nathalia, Namerka, all of those hospitals, Shepparton, none of them were forcibly amalgamated. They've all got their own boards. Why is that? Because the government that wants to introduce these things doesn't want to hurt the people who live in their safe seats. Don't be a safe seat person. If you're stuck in a safe seat, either change it or move. That'd be my advice. As I said, I'm happy to come back and answer questions at the end. I'm going to sneak out for a minute and ring my son because he's at home on his own, I'm scared. And I'll also sneak out and have a cigarette and I'll be back.
Thanks very much, Paul, for that interesting discussion. Paul mentioned that there are certain facilities that ought to be run by government, and he mentioned law and order and said that thank goodness that hasn't yet been privatised. Think of prisons. Is that the thin edge of the wedge? Anyway, it's the trend in everything. So we've got a job in front of us. Could I now introduce Dr. Barry Doughty, a local specialist physician who's recently retired and whom many of you will know.
Thank you, Peter, and hello everybody. Thank you for attending and for the opportunity to put my views. You'll find that unfortunately they'll be very similar to some of the other views, and I'm sorry to bore you, but perhaps it's a good thing to reinforce what's said anyway. I think we all ought to thank Kevin Chambers for giving us the opportunity to have the choice as to whether the base hospital continues for the next 18 years as a privatised hospital or goes back to community hands. Without him, alerting us, it would have just happened. I'd also like to thank the Burns, Donnie and Peter. They've done an enormous amount of work to make this possible tonight, and also the Reclaim the Base people have also done a lot of work. We are all actual or potential patients of the base and should have the best facilities that are practical. It's not possible to have all facilities. We can't have neurosurgery or so on here. We haven't got the population. But there are things that are practical and we should have the best of those. The base hospital, as it's currently run, is satisfactory. I don't want people to be frightened that they'll get bad treatment there, but I think we can do a lot better with it under a community system. My background gives me deep roots in Mildura. I was born here and schooled here, as was my wife. We had 13 years in Melbourne and then 2 years in Wagga. Came back here in 1973 and I had 33 years working as a consultant physician. I retired in 2006, so I've had 27 years working in the community-run Mildura Base Hospital and 6 years of Ramsay's running the hospital. I regard myself now as a medical reservist and, as I said before, a potential patient, and I've been an actual patient since I retired. Some history. Towards the end of 1990s, the old Mildura Base Hospital needed some significant repairs. Even then, the base hospital would have only been patched up and a lot of money needed to be spent on it, and it would have been better to spend that money on a new hospital. At that stage, the Victorian government was virtually bankrupt, and the only way to get a new hospital was for it to be privatised. My colleagues and I were puzzled as to why a private company would want to run a public hospital. We didn't see that they could make any money out of it, but it was the only way to get a new hospital, and we thought they should try if they wanted to try. At the same time, La Trobe, as you've heard, was privatised. That quickly folded, and we are now the only public hospital in Victoria which is privately run for a profit. We've now had 12 years of experience of this experiment, and the flaws have become obvious. The flaws are inherent in the system. It wouldn't matter which private company was running the base hospital, in my opinion, the flaws would still be there. Because of these flaws, I believe we should oppose the renewal. Certainly you all ought to debate it in any case. If we don't oppose it now, as Kevin has said, we'll have 18 years of the same system as we've got now. The flaws of the current model, as I see them, are firstly that the money allocated by the Victorian Government to run the Mildura Base Hospital has to be shared with the shareholders. There's no way you can have a private company that doesn't make a profit, so some of what's allocated has to go to the private company. If it was community run, all the money would stay with the base hospital. The second flaw, as I see it, is that, as been mentioned, decisions are made at far too remote a place from this community. There's no way we can have other than very minimal input into the decisions that are made. The third flaw, as I see it, is decisions are likewise made remotely from the Mildura Base Hospital staff. They are the core function experts of the hospital, and they should be readily able to contact the board and tell them what's needed. The community-run Mildura Base Hospital board would be much more accessible and hopefully would include some doctors and other staff. Hopefully, how can we do things better would become the bond between the hospital board and its staff, so that we had a really good zinging along hospital that develops a really good reputation. The fourth flaw, as I see it, is that a private company running a public hospital is focused on its own needs rather than the community's needs. An example of this is that the base hospital has a preference for employing salaried doctors. It sees it as cheaper to employ salaried doctors. They are good doctors, but the problem is that their contracts limit how much work they can do in the community and how much work they can do at the private hospital. Virtually none. One or two of them might have some possibility of working there. This is a big problem in an isolated community like ours. In addition, the salaried doctors don't have to spend time developing a practice, investing that time, investing money building up a practice, so they tend to stay less long. They can get up and go tomorrow without any problems, so they don't tend to build a stable medical community. The fifth flaw, as I see it, is the secret contracts which are necessary for a private company and the complexity of the arrangement that Ramsay has with the government and with the owners of the building. That's led to no new beds being available, even though we've needed those new beds for quite a long time. It's meant that elective surgery, as Kevin has pointed out, hasn't been possible on many occasions. People who organise their families, they've organised their work, and the day of the operation comes and at the last minute they're cancelled. And not only that, Kevin's pointed out the problems with training new surgeons that brings up. And the sixth flaw, of course, is what Kevin's been talking about in detail, and I won't go on any longer, in the salary packaging. I'd point out that all other regional and Melbourne public hospitals have salary packaging if they're non-profit organisations. I'd point out too that we compete worldwide for staff and at least Victoria-wide for citizens and businesses. Real estate agents will tell you, as they did me when I first went to Wagga, they'll say, what people ask is, how good are your education facilities and how good are your medical facilities? People won't go there if they're not good. So we need to have really good medical facilities. Mildura cannot afford to have a Mildura-based hospital which just satisfies government performance benchmarks, but has serious impediments in its management model which hold us back. We must develop a reputation for excellence and stand above the pack of regional Victorian hospitals and cities with which we compete for staff and people and businesses. Oh, need some water. We compete in practice with Albury-Wodonga, we compete with Wangaratta, Shepparton, Bendigo, Ballarat, Horsham, Hamilton, Warrnambool and the 3 areas in Gippsland. We can develop an excellent Mildura-based hospital, I believe, by rejecting the privately run public hospital model and developing a community-run local dynamic board Mildura-based hospital. The flaws are inherent in the privately run public hospital, and I think that they would not be present if we had a community-run local board Mildura-based hospital. I strongly recommend that we demand of the Victorian Government that this happens. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Barry. It's now Q&A time. So there are 4 people with handheld microphones, I hope, in the auditorium. And if you have a question, what I'd suggest you might do is stand up so that you can be seen, and somebody will hand you a microphone, and you may then ask a question of one of the panel. Any question you like, provided that it is a question and not a speech, because as I said before, there are so many people here that if we have speeches from the audience, we'll be here all night. It's now nearly 8 o'clock. We started at 6:30, so I'd ask your indulgence in simply asking questions, if you have any, of any members of the panel. So anyone have any questions? Over here.
I just want to ask, I'm in favour of having it in public hands, but with listening to some of the people have been saying, I wondered if we did get a public hospital again, like we should have, how will we get all the surgeons and that? Will we have enough with the retirement of the older ones that are not? Where will we get them from?
Well, I'd like to answer that if I could. I mean, you will get them because ultimately you're not going to get them tomorrow, and you'll only attract people here when you have a reputation. So, unfortunately, this is what makes me so cross, because it's going to take you 5-10 years to build a reputation, and then you'll be able to attract people who really want to come here. At the moment, we can't attract anyone because of the reasons that I've stated, but hopefully we will have some surgeons doing some work here, and they will probably be the salaried surgeons that Ramsay's are attracting at the moment. So they will fulfil that role for the time being. But what you need to attract here, I agree with Barry, is visiting medical officers who have a foot in each camp. So, you know, we go to the base hospital and say, oh, been over the private, that looked better there. And then we go over the private and say, Oh, they do it better over in the base. So, you know, you've got to have that. And that's what's kept Australia's medical system, in my humble opinion, a leader in the world. We're getting left behind here. But we will have surgeons. It's just a matter of where they come from, and we've got to try and make sure we pick good ones.
Pat, thanks for the question. Looks as though it might be a bit of a waiting game. You're a spring chicken, but I reckon I'll be out at Nichols Point in 5 years' time. But thanks, Kevin. Any other questions?
This is Maria. You've answered a couple of mine, that this is a private hospital. We shouldn't be calling it a public hospital. And you've also answered another one, why a friend of mine was moved, who's dying, was moved 4 times in 1 week into different beds. And just a thing, there was an article in The Age this week about Ramsay on Tuesday, and their share price is up by 9.5%, and they didn't do too bad during the dollar down, you know, the economic crisis downturn either. If anybody wants to read it, it's in Tuesday's Age.
What's the question, Maria?
The question is, who actually asked the hospital to be built next to a garbage dump? I've never actually found out who did that.
I'll take it. Well, it was built there because the private hospital was there, and it was just down the road from the old base. And that's what we thought was going to be a reasonable thing to do, given that that would be Mildura's new hospital. People were hopeful that the dump would be filled in, reclaimed, regrassed and made into a nice park or something. That quite hasn't happened yet, but that's right. That's how that happened. But the other part of your question was, what was the first thing you said? What? Oh, look, Ramsay making a profit. Well, I mean, now, don't get me wrong. I mean, I wish I'd invested in Ramsay. When Ramsay's came here, their share price was 70 cents. It's now 21 bucks, something like that. Unbelievable. They have done very well. These people are very, very, very good managers of private hospitals. And I don't begrudge them that at all. I just don't believe that that private companies should be running public hospitals. You know, I don't have an axe to grind about Ramsay's and their share price, or the fact that I consider them to be a very well-run company, and you know, all more power to them in their sector of the economy. They just shouldn't be in this sector, I don't think.
Maria, I guess you were talking about the article in The Age on Tuesday, were you? The one that said that Ramsay shares closed at $21.12 yesterday, up 32 cents, or 1.5% after languishing under $12 during the worst of the financial crisis. Yeah, interesting. I don't know whether you happened to crack it, but anyway, as Kevin said, they're a very, very well-run company. That's not our argument. Question over here.
Do any of the panel know the exact profits being made by Ramsay Health annually out of our public hospital?
Commercial in confidence, I believe, is the term.
Terry, I don't know that anyone can answer that question, really. No, I really don't know that the information is available in any way on their website. I certainly haven't been able to see it. Does anyone have any idea of the answer to that question? I don't think the panel does. Barry?
I can only say that I heard Dane say on ABC radio this year that, that they did make a profit out of Mildura Base Hospital. That's the only thing I can say.
I suppose the answer to the question, in a sense, is why would they be trying to renegotiate the current arrangement if they were not making a profit? But as to the amount, it's an excellent question, but I don't know that we can answer it. And maybe if there's a full-scale, full-days debate or forum on this issue organised by some other group, maybe that would be question number one, I reckon. Any other questions?
Yep, up here.
Yep.
It's Ian Banning. Just my question falls in the category, I guess, of unknown knowns. I remember 12 years ago or thereabouts, there was the four-letter word was touted around that, don't worry, this is a boot scheme. That's going to be, private enterprise are going to build your hospital, own it, operate it, and then transfer it back to the public in 15 years. Now, what's this about renegotiating a lease? Wasn't it going to be, I thought it was a no-brainer, 15 years' time, it's back to us.
Anyone on the panel have any comment about that?
Well, I don't know. I haven't read the contract and what have you, but and I believe there probably is someone in this room from Melbourne who does know all about the contract. But they're probably not willing to talk about it. But also in this contract, I think there is a 5-year discretionary leeway to either side. So even if you decide you want a public hospital again, I think if Ramsay's want to stand on their dignity, they can hang in there for another 8 years. Those are the sorts of things which, you know, I haven't had the time or inclination to find out. But you know, I agree. It's a difficult thing, but they're going to negotiate another contract for another 15 years. Long time.
There's a question here. Before the questioner asked the question, could I just make the comment that that's the first time I've ever heard it suggested it was a boot scheme, build, own, operate, transfer, because when the privatisation was mooted before the then Mildura City Council, that was not, as I recollect it, suggested. Maybe you've got it right. If that's the way it was proposed, that's not my understanding of the current contract, which is renewable by Ramsay. Absolutely a no-brainer if that's what was going to happen, but it looks like it's not. Next question.
This is at the panel. Are GPs allowed into the hospital at all? Because I know at the old base hospital they were. And no one can have their own GP in this hospital now.
Yes, there is a GP unit, and I believe there are 3 or 4 GPs who have visiting rights now. But I think the rot really started towards the end of the old hospital, in that I know from my own point of view, if I was lucky enough to get a patient in, then within 24 hours someone was hounding me to get them out. Now that culture became entrenched, and we hoped desperately that when the new hospital came, that the new manager would look at communicating with us and resolving that issue and getting us back into the hospital system. Unfortunately, as I've said, and I've said many, many times, the communication is just zero. I mean, what happens outside of those 4 walls is of no concern to Ramsay Healthcare, in my view. So instead of us being encouraged back, we were basically fed the culture that we had from before, and gradually doctors don't seem to have any interest in inpatient care anymore. So it's, again, I think it could have been resurrected by a better approach from Ramsay.
Thanks, Fazza. We've got 2 questions. There's one here and one here. I think that one first, and then you, if that's okay.
Peter, I wonder whether it's all been a bit of a mystery, this 3 years before the contract comes up. It's all being planned. Will we be able to get a process out of the government whereby we will be heard? Are we just fighting a case, or will we be able to put a case to the government? Are we sort of fighting through the back door, or can we get out of Mr Crisp some commitment to listen to us?
Well, I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I would have thought that if there is a consensus at this community meeting that the hospital should be returned to public ownership, regardless of the terms of the contract, contracts can be bought out. Whether the government would even consider doing that, in other words, paying out Ramsay and returning the hospital to public ownership following that, I can't say, but you see, the complaint would be, and one of the councillors said it at the council meeting the other night, there wouldn't be enough money for the government to do that, or like hell there wouldn't. What about the bloody Grand Prix? I mean, if you think about that, 2 years of the Grand Prix, I'm not a rev head obviously, but the Grand Prix is Melbourne based to create income for people and businesses in Melbourne. Regional development goes out the door when you're talking about that sort of operation. I would have thought that 3 years of the money currently spent on the Grand Prix would be ample to buy out the contract with Ramsay Health. I don't really know because I've never considered it, but it's given me the germ of an idea and a possible approach to the tack that ought to be adopted if this matter goes any further. But thanks for the question. Over here.
Pete, can I just hop in there, Pete?
Yes, Kevin, you're the boss.
Well, I don't think so. But the question's interesting because of 3 years. Now, this is a movable feast. It started off 3 years. OK, we've got 3 years until 2015. But, see, that will just be put back. This will be a war of attrition. This is what I'm saying to you people, that they don't have to make a decision, perhaps, until, you know, New Year's Eve on Christmas on 2014. So whenever they set a deadline, they keep moving it out a bit. Oh no, those negotiations are stalled there. We'll make a decision by November, or we'll make a decision by next March, or whatever. Whenever you think you're working towards, they will continue to move the goalposts away from you. And that's why it is going to be such a difficult thing to do. And unless Mr Crisp gets on board, then, you know, we're not going to be a goer there.
Thanks, Kevin.
I don't see a lot of people around my age in the 18 to 25-year-old age bracket at all. And I think a lot of that's because we don't understand it. Is there any information readily available between privately run hospitals and how a public hospital would help us? A lot of my friends are starting families and this is going to affect us.
Anyone on the panel able to comment?
Clarify the question.
Would you like to just ask the question again, because I didn't really understand it?
I don't see what's not to understand. People my age, we can't find the information on how putting a hospital back in public hands is going to help us. We don't understand the fact around it. To us, a hospital is a hospital. It doesn't matter who runs it. We don't understand the stuff behind the scenes where being run by the government or being run by a corporation, how is that going to affect our new family starting off? How's that going to affect the health care that we might need during pregnancy or early childhood?
The whole thrust and tenor of the speeches to date has been to tell you and the other members of the audience why the privatised model is inadequate and why it would be better if the hospital were publicly owned. That's what each of the speakers to date has said, and they've given instances like salary packaging for staff, fly-in, fly-out specialists who don't set up practices here but leave because it's cheaper for the hospital, and the list goes on and on and on. Rather than have a speaker go through all that again, could I suggest that after the meeting you have a quick chat to Kevin or Vasa or Barry or Paul and just have it from the horse's mouth again what the main, say, 5 problems are with the operation of a privatised public hospital. Does that make sense?
I did understand what the speakers had to say, but there doesn't seem to be anything that's worded so that young people can understand it. Okay, we do understand all the salary packaging and the economy, but there's nothing out there about the benefits of public hospital or the downfalls of public hospital even.
Well, let me give you an instance, one instance that I think young people can understand. Under the old system when the hospital was owned by the public, that's you and me and everyone, then if you joined the men's auxiliary at the hospital and raised money and it went to the hospital, it was for your benefit, for the community's benefit. If you took part in the Easter Hospital Appeal, which was huge, you're probably too young to remember it.
Exactly, that's kind of my point.
Yeah, but it was an enormous event annually which raised huge amounts of money for the Mildura base hospital, which was owned by the community. And that meant that people who volunteered and worked and raised money benefited the whole community. None of that happens now because people are not prepared, and it's understandable, to raise money to give to a corporation that's a profit-making operation for the shareholders. There's a thing called the Mildura Base Hospital Foundation, which was set up some years ago. It's got about $1 million in it. By now it probably ought to have had 30, 40, 50 million, and the income from it would have been for the benefit of the community through the publicly owned Mildura Base Hospital, but it's had it. It's lost in legal limbo because the hospital is no longer owned by you and me and the people here and the people of the area. It's owned by a private profit-making corporation. That's about the easiest way I can sum it up. Is that all right?
Yeah.
I guess following on from that, Peter, is the need to obviously engage with the youth. I looked around the room and I'm not youth, but I thought, geez, I'm one of the younger ones here, and that really surprised me. But I really encourage the committee to get on board with the social networking pages and the like, because my 13-year-old daughter she'll surprise me with what she comes out with, just things that she picks up on YouTube and on Facebook, and encourage the committee and ask the committee what are they doing to engage that demographic, because I think we can give a lot of power to the situation by the community.
Well, thanks for that question. I can assure you that the Committee of Reclaim the Base has taken into account what you said quite some time ago. There is a Facebook page. There has been a lot of social media used to spread the word about this meeting, and I agree entirely that that's the way to spread the word without question. For somebody like me in my age group who's been allegedly seen trying to change the TV channel with my wife's mobile phone, these things are a mystery, but you are absolutely right. For people in the younger age bracket, it's their life. And I take it on board, and if the campaign continues after tonight, that will be to the forefront. The question down the back too, after you. This one and then down the back.
I suppose I have 2 questions. One is, how many people, nurses and midwives, that locally live here, does anyone know how many we've lost since it's been privatised? I've got one family member who no longer works there, so I just wonder how many others. But the main thing I wanted to bring up is if you live on the New South Wales side, you can't get the treatment over this side. You can't get allied health, and the Wentworth Hospital was cut back, and the Mildura Base Hospital was to be our hospital. Now we had a new operating theatre and all at the Wentworth Hospital. There was talks and that, and we were to use, but since it's been privatised, if you live in New South Wales, if you're a young person or an old person, you try and get into the Mildura Base Hospital, especially for allied health. Thank you.
Not sure if that was a question or you'd like a comment, but anyone like to comment?
Look, I can certainly make some comment, if you like, on the recruitment and retention issue. And in part it answers the question, or part of the question from over here, is from a nursing perspective, and I think the medical colleagues have said similar things, there's a sort of dynamism that can grow, where people come up with new ideas and concepts and they're very proud of them, they want to develop them, and they are of great benefit to the community. And where you've got a board-run hospital, they're also proud of that. They're not immediately concerned about whether that's something that's in the contract that they're going to get funded for. It's about whether or not it's a good thing to do. And midwife-run models of midwifery care are an example of that. You know, home care for well women giving birth is an example of that, that's grown just out of the dynamism of the workforce rather than some government policy. That's something that I've seen quashed in some nursing staff at Mildura, and they have left. And some of them are here tonight grumpy about that. It's something that you're not getting paid more for doing it, you understand. It's something you do because it's what makes your heart tick. And that's getting, in some instances, quashed by the hospital because it's not their priority. And I don't see that happen elsewhere. I could be wrong, but I've never seen that happen elsewhere. Usually that's something that is engaged in by the hospital management, who are also proud to be where they are and doing the job that they're doing, rather than necessarily abiding by the key terms and key criteria of a contract.
Thanks, Paul. There's a question down the back and then one here in the front row. Thank you.
Peter, I'm going to just make a comment first about money that's from Ramsay's in terms of what their budget is and what their profit is, as opposed to the old base hospital, which relied on public funding and donations. Ramsay's seem to have now another funding stream, which is access to Medicare, which is not available to the public hospital. So I'm not sure what that means, except that they've just been able to, I suppose, double dip because they're not a public hospital, which is not allowed to bill Medicare, and so they can bill Medicare separately. Kevin, you've been down and spoken with the Minister. What's your gut feel about the likely outcome? Do you get any idea that there's any sympathy for this call?
I don't know where you get your information there, Dan. The Minister didn't even reply to my letter, so he didn't invite me down to say good day. Though I haven't met with the Minister, I don't know this guy. I mean, I'm sure he's nice, but he just hasn't done what we wanted. But in terms of what you're talking about funding there, that's right. Ramsay's have been able to set up clinics with their staff people that they pay a salary to, cut them in for a bit of the dough, and they charge Medicare for people to attend, plus an extra amount of dough that people pay. And so yes, they do have that extra income stream because they tap Medicare as well, yes. I don't quite know how they do it. I mean, because it was something when Medicare was established that was sort of illegal, that public hospitals were not supposed to charge anyone, but that has also been overturned, and public hospitals now do charge people at least a Medicare thing for turning up. Like, I think it started at the Children's Hospital. No one was game to say, oh, let's not do that because it involved children. But it's widespread now. Yeah. Lots of places do that.
Perhaps the fact that he didn't answer your letter gives us some idea of his sentiment.
Yeah, he didn't like the letter.
But just,
Thanks,
just
Dennis.
for
Thanks for the
interest's sake,
question.
Peter,
Pardon?
just for interest's sake, the consultants charge something in the order of $260 for a consultation. $220 is refundable, and whether you're a pensioner or not, you pay the gap, which is $30 to $40 for a consultation.
There you go. Question here.
Sorry, not actually a question, more of a comment. You've mentioned 5 issues that face Ramsay. I think there's a 6th one and a big one that was actually mentioned earlier by one of our speakers. I'm hoping it's not lost on everyone here tonight. And that 6th one is that all the employees, like myself of Ramsay's, are contractually bound not to comment on issues like this. And I can't help but think how that might fill out the picture a bit more if we could.
I'm also an employee of Ramsay's, and so, well, I have been up until now, but like I've tried to say, I don't have a problem with Ramsay's as a group of people, or indeed the local management. These people are doing what they have been contracted to do. What I have a problem with is giving them a contract in the first place. So, it's, I suppose, I haven't read my, well, I'm in breach of my contract anyway, because I don't do on-call, which was the original one that I signed up for. I said I would do on-call. Well, after a heart attack, a couple of stents, a bit of a cardiomyopathy and a couple of back operations, I said, bugger it, I'm not doing this anymore. So I still go there, and I approached management and said, look, this is my situation. I'm not prepared to keep, you know, staggering in here every night. And they said, well, okay. And they've allowed me to continue to work in their hospital, which I do on a weekly basis. But up till now. So.
Thank you, Kevin. Tomorrow might be an interesting day for you. It's now nearly 8:30. I'll take your question in a minute. Now nearly 8:30, and I just wondered, would it be appropriate to have a couple more questions and then pull up, or keep going? Okay, 2 more questions, and then we might see what happens. Question here, firstly here, and then a question there.
Thank you. Mr. Chambers, can't half tell that I'm one of his patients, can you? And but I wonder whether or not your PowerPoint is available for our use as we arm ourselves to confront various people around the place, such as I know I'll be targeting quite a number of the councillors I know, and I just have to say that even though I've been angry and peeved greatly about this hospital thing, I've never actually known the full details and reasons why I have this anger in me, and I just wondering whether we can plagiarise your work.
Well, thank you. I can't guarantee the truthfulness of all the things in that but to the best of my knowledge, it's true. And I don't even know how much those little J sticks cost. I can't supply 500 of them, I don't think. I think they, but if anyone wanted that, I don't have any objection to my presentation going viral.
One more question here, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Teresa. I had the honour to be at the Mildura Base Hospital the day of the official open, and one specialist come in and asked my opinion. I said, what do you think about the hospital, new one? I said, yeah, it's just a good, they took us alive to the tip. What do you reckon? And he started laughing in a smart way. He said, oh, you know why we built here? Because every time we got a patient, any organ is not good, we take it off from the window. Thank you.
Well, that's an interesting and perceptive comment, which doesn't really require an answer, but thanks for that. It's 8:30 and it's probably time to just about pull the plug. It's been a very interesting evening, I think you'd agree. And is Crispy here? No, apparently he hasn't made it. He was coming and he genuinely tried to be here, but he's obviously been unable to be here, and that's regrettable. But I'll certainly let him know that I read out his email. Now, I don't know if the people here have formed a sort of a consensus on a motion that somebody might be prepared to move. Does anyone have a... Robert Biggs, you've got the microphone. Have you got a motion you want to move?
Yeah, yes, Peter, actually I do. I think for good reason I'd like to move the following motion. I think that what we've heard tonight gives great clarity about the reasons why we should be concerned and why we should choose to act. So I'd like to move this motion that the Mildura community demands that the Mildura Base Hospital be returned to public ownership.
Thank you, Robert. Is there a seconder for the motion?
500 people.
I think we'll just put the word numerous. Does anyone want to speak against the motion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Robert. Just to finish off, there is a petition at the back of the hall on the tables on your way out, quite a few copies of it, calling on the state government, and it's properly worded so that it can go to the Parliament, calling on the state government to return the hospital to public ownership. If you feel inclined to sign it on the way out, that would be excellent, because we'll then have something to hand to Peter Crisp, who can take it to the Parliament. There's also a box on the table near the front or back door, whichever you call it, for anyone to put their name and contact details in if they'd like to be further involved in this campaign, if I could call it that, to have the base hospital returned to public ownership. And if anyone puts their name and contact details in the box, they will be contacted by somebody from the committee of Reclaim the Base, and from that group we may get a bigger committee to continue what's happening. Well, we've got a motion that's to go to Peter Crisp and the Minister for Health, no doubt. What else do you want to do? Where to from here? Does anyone have any views on what we ought to do? Can you wait for a microphone? Could somebody give this gentleman a microphone, please? Thank you, Jill.
Where is he though? Oh, thanks.
Well, have you got some idea of what you want to see happen from after tonight?
I just wanted to say, anyone who signs them petitions, do not put a box number. Put their actual address, because if you put a box number, it can be discarded.
I thank you for that, and you're dead right. There's got to be a residential address there. What's the old saying that the coppers used to use? Don't tell me that, you don't live in a box. Anyway, anyone else got a thought? Could we get a microphone down there? I just want to get some idea of where you think we ought to go from here.
This question goes to Paul. Obviously, with your...
We've finished with questions. The only question is from me asking what you want to do from tonight onwards.
I think we need to be guided by people who know how to organise these protests or these community meetings. So I'd like to have some direction from Paul. He alluded to his speech before, but can he give us some ideas? Because obviously with 500 people here and 60,000 people in this district, how do we go about actually doing this, Paul?
think the chairman's been campaigning around things for a little longer than me, perhaps, but I did want to make, I think what Peter's asking for is people to make some suggestions about things that you guys ought to be doing. And I made, some comments earlier about, I feel a bit nervous about them now that I know your local members in the room, but about ensuring that the local member is open and unambiguous in supporting what is being asked for at this meeting. And that may involve annoying the living daylights out of Mr Crisp for some considerable period of time until he shares that view unambiguously. Another proposition that is worth considering, and a few people have done it in their previous histories here, is for Mr Crisp to organise a delegation to go to Spring Street from this group to advocate the position and get some very clear answers from something we never got during our dispute, but anyway, some very clear answers from the Minister about the government's position, the time frames, when a decision would be made, whether a decision would be made before and another address is made by government representatives to the Mildura community. You've got to get some pretty strict time frames about what time you've got to move in, and I think Mr Crisp is very well positioned to do that for his community. So.
Thank you, Paul. I'll take one more comment and then I'll call the meeting to a halt. But before you use the microphone, could I welcome Peter Crisp, our local member? Thanks for coming, Peter. I did read out your email.
Thank you.
And made some comments. And amongst the comments I said we'd found that we're distantly related to our mutual benefit. But thanks very much for coming. And a motion has been passed unanimously by the 500 or 600 people here that this public meeting, this community meeting, demands that Mildura Base Hospital be returned to public ownership. But we'll give you a copy of that before you leave. Thanks. Last comment.
The question was raised, how do we inform the community?
Sorry, last comment. Thank you. You've got the microphone.
The question was raised, how do we inform the community? In this room tonight, we have grandparents and parents, so please tell your children and your grandchildren, because they're the ones on Facebook.
Thanks very much for your comment. I think we've had a pretty good night so far. We've had a very interesting set of speeches. And we've got a motion on the books, and I've got somebody here who wants to raise a point of order. This is not a formal meeting and it's not the council, so you can have a chat with me when I'm finished if you like, but I'm now going to close the meeting unless there's a very good reason why I shouldn't.
It might be too late if you close the meeting, Mr Chairman.
Well, you tell us quickly what it is.
I have recently attended a meeting where notice of motions and points of order were taken, and it was a chaos. Tonight, you may regret if you don't get a named person to the seconder of the motion. Just think of the member of Dobell.
Well, that's fair comment, and I thank you for that, and it's a point of order well taken. We have got a motion moved by Robert Biggs. We really do need a seconder. Is that a seconder over there? Lloyd Thompson is prepared to second the motion, and I thank you for that, for being persistent enough to keep going in the... So, Crispy, we've got a motion moved and seconded, passed unanimously. We'll tell you about it. Thanks very much for coming. We really appreciate your attendance. I think we've all learned a lot tonight. I'll now declare the meeting closed. Safe trip home, and we'll see what happens after tonight.